I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's May 25th, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we get into today's special episode, I want to remind you that May 30th is World MS Day. World MS Day is all about sharing our stories, raising awareness, and speaking with one voice, no matter where in the world you may be. The theme for World MS Day is connections, and that means building community connections, self-connection, and connections to quality care. World MS Day is about the global MS community coming together to advocate for better services, to celebrate our support networks, and to demand access to affordable, quality care. I hope you'll take a moment to visit worldmsday.org to see how you can play a role in changing the future. You'll find a link to the World MS Day website in today's show notes. So a moment ago, I said that today's episode is a special episode, and it's special because all of you pretty much dictated the content by asking some questions that I think are on everybody's mind. The thing that a lot of people affected by MS are talking about and wondering about is the new CDC guidance, advising those of us who have been fully vaccinated that we no longer have to wear a mask or socially distance except when we're in a large crowd or where it's required by local laws or regulations. That guidance has created a lot of confusion in general, and both confusion and concern among people affected by MS who may have questions about how their disease-modifying therapy might be impacting the efficacy of their COVID-19 vaccination. So joining me to resolve some of that confusion is Dr. Nancy Sicotte, and we're answering your questions about vaccines, antibodies, variants, whether to mask or not to mask, and more. Dr. Nancy Sicotte is a professor and chair of the Department of Neurology at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, California, where she's also the Women's Guild Distinguished Chair in Neurology and director of the MS and Neuroimmunology program. And as chair of the MS Society's National Medical Advisory Committee, Dr. Sicotte leads the Society's COVID-19 Vaccine Advisory Group. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Nancy Sicotte. The National MS Society has convened a group of MS research and clinical experts to provide guidance for people living with MS when it comes to making decisions about the safety, efficacy, and the timing of COVID-19 vaccines as they relate to certain MS disease-modifying therapies. As the chair of the MS Society's National Medical Advisory Committee, Dr. Nancy Sicotte leads this effort. Dr. Sicotte is a professor and chair of the Department of Neurology at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where she's also the Women's Guild Distinguished Chair in Neurology and director of the MS and Neuroimmunology program. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Sicotte.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be back again.
Well, you and I last spoke about COVID-19 vaccines back in January as the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were just being made available. Since then, we have a bit more information about the vaccines, and people seem to have even more questions. So I appreciate you making the time for this update.
I'm happy to do it, and I think that I agree with you. There's a lot of interest out there and a lot of questions. Well,
first, I'd like to cover a couple of questions that I know I've asked you before, but I think your answers bear repeating. So are the COVID-19 vaccines from Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson safe for people living with MS?
John, the answer remains yes, and I'm happy to say that. And as more time goes by, we recognize that they are safe and very effective.
What have we seen are the common side effects that people might experience after getting the vaccine? And will people with MS experience the same side effects as people who don't have MS?
So that's a great question. And I think like most vaccines, you can expect that you're likely to have some soreness at the site of the injection. And in particular for the vaccinations that are given twice, which would be the two mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, especially with that second vaccine, you may feel some fatigue, a little muscle aches, even run a low-grade fever. So these are the same symptoms. People living with MS will have the same symptoms as those without MS, and they don't seem to be more likely to have more severe symptoms associated with vaccination. But because living with MS, we do know that if you get a temperature, for example, a fever, that might cause some of your old MS symptoms to reappear, and you may notice some of those cropping up in that day or two after you have your vaccine. So this is not anything to be concerned about. This is just the same as if you had had the flu, or if for some people who are heat sensitive when they go out on a hot day. It's what we call Udhoff's phenomena. So it's very well known and described. And doesn't mean you're having a new attack or a relapse. And we recommend drinking lots of fluids, resting, taking analgesics, and the symptoms should subside within 24 to 48 hours. If they don't, then that might be something to contact your neurologist about. But so far, we have not seen any evidence that the vaccines cause new disease activity in MS.
Well, let's talk about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for a moment. After a brief pause, the CDC and FDA recommended that use of the J&J vaccine be resumed in the United States. Nearly all of the reports of the rare adverse event of blood clots after receiving the J&J vaccine occurred in adult women younger than 50 years old. What's the risk that women under 50 years of age could develop this condition after receiving the J&J vaccine?
So thanks for bringing that up, John, because I know there's been a lot of concern about that. So I just want to emphasize that those blood clot risks are extremely rare. So the incidence is about 1 in a million in terms of the amount of vaccines that have been administered and the occurrence of this. Now, it is, as you said, more common. The cases that were reported were in women who were under the age of 50. And our MS population could be represented more significantly in that group. So the recommendation is, again, the vaccine is thought to be safe, it's effective, it's a single dose, it has a really important role to play in bringing us to herd immunity and getting beyond the pandemic. But in the situation where all things being equal, if you had access, as if you're a younger woman and you have access to other vaccines, you might choose that rather than doing the J&J. But again, we want to emphasize that this risk is extremely low. And now that it's recognized, we've seen there are effective ways to treat this side effect. And so I think we are feeling more confident that we can manage this. But again, want to emphasize how rare it is.
While we're speaking specifically about women, there's an awful lot of online chatter around the subject of the COVID-19 vaccines causing infertility. What can you tell us about these vaccines and their impact on fertility?
As I said previously when we were speaking about this, I don't know where these ideas come from, where this information comes from, because there's absolutely nothing in the scientific literature or in any of our experience, anything that's been reported to suggest this. So I just will emphasize for your audience that there is absolutely no evidence that these vaccines have any impact on fertility. And in fact, women who are of childbearing age are especially encouraged to get vaccinated, because should they become pregnant, they are a high-risk group if they do develop COVID. So it does not impair fertility, and we certainly wouldn't want to see that group of individuals avoiding the vaccine because of what I would call an urban myth that is out there.
We know that the CDC continually monitors COVID-19 variants. What are we learning about these variants, and what do we know about the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines that are authorized for use in the U.S. when it comes to these variants?
So this is a rapidly evolving situation. And as we've seen in some of the countries that have experienced large surges, this is usually the setting where these variants can emerge. And that's because the viruses can replicate and mutate very quickly. They're kind of sloppy when they're replicating. And if it just so happens that one of these variations makes it more easy to spread or to get infected, that variant will begin to dominate community spread. So there have been a lot of concerns that potentially these variants could be resistant to the vaccinations that have been developed. The good news is for the vaccines that have been developed in the United States, there's no evidence to date that there's less efficacy for these variants. So we've done very well in terms of not having these variants, reemerge in vaccinated individuals. But as I said, this is a very fluid, and the best way to prevent variants from emerging is to decrease the spread of the virus, decrease the number of people who are getting infected. So there is concern, of course, in India right now because they're having such a massive surge there, and there are some variants that have emerged as well. So it will require some time to determine how the vaccines that are now available work against that particular variant. But again, it emphasizes the fact that we need to stop the transmission of the virus in order to really move forward and get our arms around the pandemic.
The FDA has expanded the emergency use authorization for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to include adolescent children ages 12 through 15. So now everyone 12 years old and older is able to be vaccinated. This has raised some new questions from parents and teens who are living with MS. We know that children and teens can get COVID-19, and we know that they can spread COVID-19. So is the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine safe for children in this age group who are living with MS?
I would just say, John, that this is another great advance in our march to defeat the virus. And I think this will make a big impact in terms of the community spread. As you know, children who develop COVID, and they are very much at risk for having COVID because, again, it's a brand new virus. They do seem to do much better and are less likely to be hospitalized or develop severe COVID. But they can serve as a reservoir for transmission in the community. And also they can have asymptomatic infections that could, cause problems in schools and other settings and infect other people who might be at risk for more severe disease. So what we've seen so far, just as we have in adults, there's no evidence that those people, those adolescents who are living with MS have any risk associated with the vaccine. It appears to be safe and very effective. Now, they didn't specifically test individuals who have MS with the early onset in childhood and adolescence, so we don't have specific data. But we're very reassured when we see how safe and effective the vaccines are, including in this age group.
And since it's the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that's received this authorization, do children in this age range need to receive both doses before they're fully vaccinated?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. This is how the vaccines have been tested. This is how they've been validated, and the information that we have and the data we have comes from fully vaccinated individuals. So we absolutely recommend that you complete the full 2 shots of the vaccine in order to get the maximum benefit from the vaccination.
What about teens, adolescents who have had COVID-19? Should they still be vaccinated?
So the advice right now is yes. Even if you've had an infection, you will have, it's thought that you'll have some transient protection from getting reinfected, but we have seen individuals who have had COVID who've then several months later been sickened again. So the recommendation now is that even if you've had COVID in the past, that you go ahead and get vaccinated. And we would definitely recommend that people do that in order to be completely protected.
Some studies have begun to show that people living with MS who are on Ocrevus and other B-cell depleting therapies are not developing a sufficient antibody response after being fully vaccinated. So what does this mean in terms of someone's protection from COVID-19?
Well, John, that's not an easy question. You're going right to the heart of the matter. So this is something that is been bubbling up in terms of concern, thinking about not only our patient population, but others who are immunosuppressed. So people who've had solid organ transplants or cancer, and how well the vaccines will work in these individuals whose immune systems are not normal. So in the MS world, we have multiple disease-modifying therapies that impact immune responses. The B-cell depleters were really the ones we were thinking about initially because they affect the cells that actually grow up to become the antibody-making cells. And the tests that we use to see if you've been vaccinated or if you've had a response to the vaccine are these antibody tests. So there has been some new data coming out of Israel looking at a variety of small numbers, but people who are on disease-modifying therapies. And there are some drugs that when people are taking them and get vaccinated, their antibody levels seem to be low and lower than you would see in other people who are not on those medications who are vaccinated. But what we don't know is if that means then that they're not protected from getting the virus, we don't know if that is equivalent to a lack of protection. And this is really the key point, and it goes to the complicated nature of the immune system. There are several parts of it, and so B cells are just one of them. The other arm is T cells, and it is very much the case that T cell responses will likely be important in providing protection as well. And T cell responses are stimulated by vaccines also. We haven't been testing those and measuring those. So I think this is an area where there's intense interest. The National MS Society is convening another group. We're going to be meeting next week to start talking about how do we answer some of these really critical questions for our patients. What is the data we need? What are the studies that we need? So I think that Israeli study, and there are several other groups across the country and across the world that are collecting this data. Again, not just in MS patients, but cancer patients and other groups to better understand who might be at risk for infection, even though they've had the vaccine. So I think we need to be vigilant. But I don't think that that's a reason that people should not get vaccinated. They should also recognize there's some new advice that the CDC has put out, and it's also on the website at the National MS Society website about how to interpret your antibody response. And the CDC is very clearly saying you cannot use that as a proxy for whether or not you have protection against the virus. So we just don't know yet. We don't have that data, but that is something of very intense interest going forward.
The CDC has also updated their recommendations to allow fully vaccinated people to resume most activities without wearing a mask or physically distancing, except in those instances where it's required by local laws or regulations. So let's talk about what this means for someone who's living with MS, who's been fully vaccinated. We just talked about not yet knowing how protected someone with MS who's on certain disease-modifying therapies is, even after being fully vaccinated. So what should people living with MS on these therapies do? Do they continue wearing a mask?
Yeah, so this is where the rubber hits the road. And I always quote my friend and colleague, Ann Cross, who said, get vaccinated, but act as though you're not. Meaning, assume that you might still be at risk for getting infected, especially if you were on one of those disease-modifying therapies that we've talked about. So we also, I would say, based on the CDC guidance, we want to use common sense. When you're in a setting where you know everyone else is vaccinated and you know who the individuals are, and you're fully vaccinated and on one of these medications, that is a safe situation where you could go without your mask. But if you're in a situation where you don't know the status of other people, whether they've been vaccinated or not, if you're in a mixed group, that would be a time where you would want to keep your mask on. And in truth, this is a situation where I would keep my mask on until we get closer to what we would call herd immunity, and we have much, much less virus out there in the community. So that would be the safest thing to do. So I know it's kind of a bummer to have to keep wearing a mask, but it's a small price to pay, I think, in order to stay safe. And I am absolutely certain that we're going to feel much more comfortable and have much more data as we go forward in the next coming weeks and months. But I would also argue this is not a reason not to be vaccinated. Some people say, oh, well, we just have to keep wearing our mask. Why bother getting vaccinated? The vaccine will allow the virus transmission in the community to decrease. And we're seeing those results. We are seeing how well that works here in California. We're seeing very small numbers of new cases, and it continues to drop throughout the country. So we know the vaccines work and we know they have a good effect. We just need to have a little more patience as we complete this course and see how well we're going to do going forward. And that really is not probably a satisfying answer because it's not just a wear it here or not. But I would say we're going to be having our masks nearby for several more months.
Well, when people talk about getting back to something close to normal, a new normal, a lot of times I hear them talking about entertainment options or going shopping, and all of that's really important. But a lot of people also have to go to work, and offices are reopening. So people who have been vaccinated and people who haven't been vaccinated are returning to work. Is it safe for people living with MS to return to their workplace? And if it is, should they continue wearing that mask while they're at work?
So I think there are certain workplaces where this is all being worked out, as you know. So I'm here at the hospital and we continue to wear our masks when we are around other people, even though the vast majority of individuals here are vaccinated. There are some who are not, and we don't know who they are. And we're in a clinical setting. So there are certain settings, certain work settings where you will continue to wear your mask regardless. But I think it is safe to be back in that environment. So I think a lot of offices will be coming up with guidelines for this. And that would include bringing people back who have been fully vaccinated. And in that setting, I think that there's a lot of evidence that this is very safe and that people living with MS who've been vaccinated should feel comfortable being in that environment. The only caveat, as I said, was if they're on one of these other medications where we're still gathering more data about how well the vaccine works and the protection that you accrue if you're on one of those other medications. The better part of valor would be to keep your mask on when you're around other individuals, especially if you don't know their vaccine status. So it will be very interesting to see how this evolves because I think we want to be careful, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're allowing people to go back to more normal activities. And I think there's a lot of confidence building steps that are going to be required to get to what we might think of was normal before. We're not going to get there by flipping a switch.
Well, Dr. Nancy Sicotte, thank you for all that you do to improve the lives of people living with MS. And thanks so much for coming back on the podcast again and helping us work our way through some of this otherwise confusing information. Thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure. And I'm looking forward to coming back and having more definitive information for your audience as we learn more. But I will say we've made great progress, so I'm very optimistic.
That's going to wrap up this episode of RealTalk MS. RealTalk MS is powered by the National MS Society, and you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/195. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or text. And now I have a favor to ask. It would mean a lot to me if you'd leave a rating and review for RealTalk MS. Just point your web browser at realtalkms.com/review, and you'll see links to the different online destinations that you can choose from to leave that rating and review. And those links are going to be different for each of you because they're based upon the software that you happen to be using to listen to the podcast, or at least that you have installed on your phone, tablet, or desktop computer. For instance, if you happen to be using an Android phone to listen to RealTalk MS, you won't see a link to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts because you can't leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you're using an Android phone. I hope that makes sense. It's just a little bit of technology that makes leaving a rating and review super easy. So I hope you'll take a moment to leave a rating and review for RealTalk MS, and you'll find a link to do that in today's show notes. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.